direction right now. Why don't we take a break so we can calm down, cool down, and then with clear heads, we can come and have dialogue again. But also you can state your perspective in a non-confrontational way. You ever heard of that? State your perspective in a non-confrontational way? That is stating how the situation is impacting you and what can you do together to resolve the conflict. So one thing that you can do is talking about what you two can do together, accomplish together to resolve whatever the situation is. So telling your perspective in a non-confrontational way, right? It's all about the words we're using, again, the energy that we're using and how we're saying things. Any thoughts on number 6? Okay, we'll go to number 7. Know this, almost all conflicts are based in an unmet need. Excuse me, here my screen is frozen, there we go. The more you can communicate your needs instead of your complaints, the better off you will be. So I said a little while ago, when we're in conflict, the first things that are coming out of our mouths is a complaint, right? What's happening, what the other person is doing to me, what the other person said about whatever the case might be. If we envisioned it as a tree, the top of the tree, we see the leaves, right? That's the first thing we see. And that's the complaints, right? That's the first thing that people say when they're in conflict. But underneath the tree is the roots, right? We can't see them, but we know they're there. And then in conflict, it's the same way. Every conflict has an unmet need. It hasn't been stated. It hasn't been heard. It hasn't been acknowledged. And so that's why the conflict is continuing, because we haven't said what's important to me, what's salient to me, and we haven't heard what the other person's needs are as well. I see a little message here. Give me a second. I saw someone put something on the chat, but I can't pull it up for some reason.
Yeah, do you want me to read it to you or can you see it?
Yes, please, if you can.
Arthur Brooks in his talk Thursday said, we're speaking to each other nationally with contempt for each other's points of view. How can we avoid this?
Talking about, well, using all your tips, but also if we're on tip number 7 is talking about what's important to you, right? The underlying need. Underlying need means putting it in a word, right? So that the other person can hear it, whether it's respect. So think about what's important to you, right? Respect, acknowledgement, understanding, listening, communication, empathy, right? Equity, justice, fairness. I mean, there's so many. You know, when we do the full length training, we do a whole exercise on this and we do a list, we chart them, right? And so that's what's going to help you is talking about underlying needs. What's important to me in the moment instead of communicating your complaint, right? Any thoughts on number 7? Any of the needs out there?
I think that was really an interesting point. I've been thinking about, like, how do we reconcile the extremes, not only of our political spectrum, but of the people behind it that we see, you know, these far right-wing groups. And I often feel like, well, it's hard to talk to those people because their actions are anathema to me. But I also believe underneath they have real issues and needs that are not being met. And it's a kind of $1 trillion question, like at a national level, how, you know, would you see that we would address those groups of far right people? Would we address those individually? Are we giving them too much credence? You know, how do you have any ideas of how they could be approached?
With kindness,
Mm.
with empathy, and with a sincere willingness to hear them out. You don't have to agree. Conflict resolution is not about agreeing with the other person. It's about healthy dialogue of each other's perspective, right? And I know when I've been in situations where I'm having, and I can think about my nephew right now as I'm thinking about this, he's a complete polar opposite politically than me, right? And one time when we were having this discussion about where he stood and where I stood and who we were going to vote for and all that, he expressed to me that every time he tried to talk about why he was voting for a certain candidate, every single person would tell him, "Oh, you're crazy. You don't even know what you're saying.
Mhm.
You're crazy. It's not true, right?" And so he expressed to me that made him feel, one, like, well, maybe I am crazy, but also like it undervalued him. This is a person who has thoughts and he thinks about this stuff, right? And so one thing that he appreciated and he told me was that, at least you let me talk, Tia, auntie. She said, at least you let me talk and you don't just cut me off, right? And I think that's something that we can do. Just hear them, listening to them with a sincere, kind ear, right? Again, you don't have to agree, but you can definitely have dialogue with each other, kind dialogue. I think someone put something on the chat.
Yes, Veronica, one of our members said, I love your response. I agree with it. However, access to that population is a challenge, both safety-wise and, do they have a willingness to hear us?
Exactly. I agree. If the person is not willing to hear you out, they're going to tell you, right? They're going to tell you right away. If it's not safe for you, we're not advocating to go out into the streets and forcibly have these conversations. Of course, the other person has to be willing to sit down and have those conversations with you. I know that I've been in marches before, and I've encountered people who are in the complete opposite spectrum of me politically wise. And, I've tried to have those conversations, but the minute I saw I was either getting too aggressive or disrespectful, whenever I'm having dialogue with someone, crude language is not acceptable for me. So if we're going to use B words and F words and C words and all that, I'm off. I'm not going to, you cannot have a healthy, respectful dialogue if you're using disrespectful words, mm-hmm. right? And so if the other person, though, is willing to sit down and really talk through where they're coming from and where I'm coming from, then, I that's good. I advocate for that. Go for it. As long as you're really sincerely listening to them, again, without agreeing. Any other thoughts on number 7?
This is Patricia, let me just, okay. Okay, that was from Lorraine, who asked the question, saying, we do need to address this. I have a question a little bit, can you address kind of the cancel culture? We seem to have decided that, and I've got to say, I kind of agreed with it in the beginning, and now I'm rethinking it. If people use a certain kind of speech, hate speech, well, we take them off, Facebook, or we take them off. And I was very glad, I've got to say, to see our former president, taken off Twitter and not allowed to create more hatred. But then that goes against a little bit what you're saying, or it would seem to, that no, everybody's got a right to express their view, and we need to hear their view and, thoughtfully.
Yes. And, we all have freedom of speech, right? We all have this right to talk about what we want to say. I think I personally, and, I can only speak on me about what I think, but Personally, I feel that if the speech is causing hurt,
Mhm.
if it's causing physical pain, if it's, endangering communities, endangering children and families, then that's not right.
Mhm.
Because there are other people out there who act on it, right? I think it's our responsibility to keep our community safe. We all live
Mhm.
here, right? It's not just
Yeah.
me, it's not just the other person. We all live here. It takes a neighborhood, right, to raise a child. Have you ever heard of that saying before? And it's so true. So my words impact my neighbor and
Mhm.
his children and their children, right? So I think we have to have personal responsibility for what we're saying. And if our words are causing, detrimental damages to our communities, then I think, for me, I would be okay with canceling someone out like that,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
Now, if it's just kind of language or thoughts that, maybe they're a little far-fetched, but they're not really hurting anyone. Maybe the person is just not educated enough, or they haven't really understood the position enough. If it's someone that I really love and care for, I can't see myself canceling out someone like that out of my life, right? And I believe, you know, maybe I'm uber positive, but I always believe in the goodwill of people, right? I always feel like there's something good, inherently good in each person. So I like to give opportunities, right? I like to give people chances and then see where it goes from there. I think I saw a message come down on the chat.
Okay, that's just a little bit of chat there between people who have expressed opinions. So I think we can probably.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll go to the next one. We're almost there. Tip 8, take time before you talk. It is hard to think clearly when one is angry. Whew, isn't that the truth, right?
Oh,
When
yes.
we're not regulating our emotion, we're not in any position to acknowledge, to be empathetic, to be inclusive. We're not in any position to hear the other person out. So taking time to de-escalate those emotions inside of you helps you move forward, move the conversation forward. If we're letting our emotions get the better of us, we're not going to have we're not going to be able to have healthy dialogue. And I'm just quickly going to share this is, you can read books and studies on this, but there's this concept of emotional regulation through positive intelligence. Have anyone ever seen this before?
No, I haven't.
So the professor, the doctor who created this says, we have the IQ, right? That measures our intelligence. But what he's saying is that our emotional intelligence is more important even than the intellectual IQ, right? And so he says that the PQ brain, we want to exercise that more. That's the part of the brain that we want to think through, especially when we're confronted with conflict, because it allows for self-observation, centering in challenging situations, soothing negative emotions, and it allows for us to show empathy for self and others. This part of the brain that it's underused, because it's so easy for us to kind of fall back on that kind of negative, right? The fight or flight, thinking of me only, allowing our emotions get the better of us. So what he's advocating for is to use your PQ brain and acknowledge that this is even more important than your IQ. And you can read more through this. This is a very, very kind of cool concept. I would recommend reading through. You can find all kinds of good stuff online. And I'm not a doctor, but the PQ brain is here on the front part of it.
Mm-hmm.